Welcome, O Ramadan.
Radio Sultanate of Oman 90.4 and the Sultan Qaboos Center for Islamic Culture presents Reaching Out Through Dialogue. Listen and get involved. It is a great experience for you personally. It would really create a balance on each and every one of us in this holy month of Ramadan.
Stand up.
Reaching Out Through Dialogue, presented by Hatim Harif Al Abdussalam,
Charity.
directed by Matloob Ayel Al Wahabi. Reaching Out Through Dialogue, a special in this holy month of Ramadan, here on 90.4 FM.
For the pleasure of
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear listeners. Welcome to our program Reaching Out Through Dialogue. I'm your host Hatim Al Abdussalam, and we welcome our distinguished guest today, Mr. Ahmed Al Mukhaini. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How are you today?
Alhamdulillah, and you?
Fine, thank you. Alhamdulillah. How's fasting?
Not too bad, though.
I hope you're coping.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Rabbil Alameen.
Alhamdulillah.
Today we have an interesting topic.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about the rights and duties of workers and employees in Islam. Humans are social beings and live in groups. They by default work together to sustain their communities. This relationship institutes rights and duties. Work is a social mechanism adopted by different ideologies to reflect their values. In your opinion, Ahmed, what is the value base for work in Islam?
Thank you, Hatim, for the question. I think, I always find joy, actually, in talking about the value base of the various elements of society, because it does reflect how Islam sets itself apart from others. As we mentioned once before, justice is the highest value embraced by Islam, and actually, in a way, Islam prides itself in being the religion of just, or just being following the just examples of God. So to answer your questions, your question here, I think there are a variety of values, but perhaps the most important are 5, and the highest of these 5 is justice.
Okay.
And justice does require people to treat each other equally, and to do unto yourself, unto others what you want others to do unto yourself.
Okay.
And justice is also respect of the law. The other value of work in Islam, or underpins work in Islam, is the value of ability. To understand the ability and individual abilities, as in Islam is called al-wus', because Allah, in the way Islam sees things, Allah has created people in variety of abilities, and then each one of us is required to exert effort within that realm of that ability,
Okay.
not to actually be overburdened. The third value is mercy, or perhaps kindness. Mercy in Islam, mercy in Islam is often referred to as rahmah, while kindness is often referred to as rifq. And while rahmah can be an absolute term, rifq is very much a relative term, and it's also it's an act of mercy, but with a balance.
Okay.
So what can be an act of mercy in one case could be an act of extreme mercy in the other case, and vice versa. So, your mercy or your attitude towards mercy might actually oscillate in terms of being very merciful or least merciful, depending on the ability and the situation. The other underlining value, the fourth one, is the understanding of the concept of integrity of human beings,
Okay.
karama. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created all mankind, men and women, all equal, and all, having sufficient existential integrity within them. And that integrity does require us to respect them and respect the work they provide. And finally, I would say all of the aforementioned values pour into a melting pot, which is another value in its own right, and that is istikhlaf or vicegerency, or if you want to use a Christian term, stewardship and agency. So all of these together make us in Islam look at work as a very important social but also a religious mechanism. It is not strictly social laden with values, social mechanism laden with values. It is a religious duty, a religious mechanism through which worship is observed in favor of God.
Now, if I may ask, do these values go along together, or you can just take one of them and leave out the rest?
No, you have to take them together.
You have to take them together.
There are, of course, overriding values. I know some ethicists and value scholars or philosophers would disagree with me. They would say all values are equal. But I would agree to an extent, but I would say there are overriding values. For instance, in this example, justice is the overriding value. It's the ultimate objective of Islam. Everything has to be seen from that perspective. Everything has to be seen through that prism, the prism of justice.
So if you practice the value of justice, everything else comes automatically.
It comes through. It comes through. But you have to be aware and abreast of the others.
Now, just for our understanding, what do we mean generally by work and workers?
Work in Islam can actually take different formats or different interpretations. But perhaps what pertains most to the discussion today is what we'd call exchange or complementarity of abilities. Person A, can actually do hard work. Person B will do more intelligent work. Person C is much better in
Financial terms
and so forth. So it goes back to the concept of abilities. Every person has his or her own individual abilities and skills, which then they can actually enhance. Using that skill alone, they cannot actually serve society. They cannot serve themselves. I cannot do all the baking I need. I cannot do all the grocery acquisition I need. I cannot do all the rubbish collection I need. So we have services, we have people that have these abilities, and together as a society we agree that we will share, we will complement each other in exchange either for some monetary consideration or exchange of value consideration or other human consideration. And in that context, workers in Islam can actually be either human workers, and they can be employees or just workers in a normal kind of very simple, direct task. There's no difference between private and public sector, no difference between civil society and others. They're all workers. And we have animal workers, because in Islam, animals have important rights. You cannot employ animals to work for you without respecting those rights. And though animals can speak, and actually, in fact, it becomes more important in Islam because animals cannot defend themselves. So you have to be more careful about their rights, while humans,
So Islam has touched on this area as well of human animal rights.
Of course.
Rights.
Yeah, certainly.
We'll get to that point later on. We'll start with the focus on human workers. Let us focus on the specific categories of rights. We'll start with, let's say, for example, choice of work.
Pardon me. Yes. It's interesting. I mean, for me, as somebody who has been working with, recently particularly, with human rights, to look at how human rights, in the general sense and in Islam, they match extremely. Particularly that, there's a misunderstanding that there is a lot of force in Islam. Well, actually, there's a lot of choice in Islam. And one of the examples is choice of work. And again, it goes back to the concept of, or the values rather, of ability and the value of justice. If
Okay.
you want to be just to somebody, just in terms of evaluating their performance, just in terms of expecting work from them, you have to give them choice of work. You cannot impose on them. You cannot subjugate them
To a specific,
to specific task if they don't know how to do it just because they need it. So humans are given the choice in terms of work, and also choice in terms of how they want to discharge that work, that responsibility. Of course, within the law, within certain framework.
So
with
we don't want it to lead into chaos if
course.
everyone wants to do whatever they feel
Of
that
course,
is
of
right.
course. But if I give an example, I use this example very often with my children. If you want to make an omelette, okay, so your responsibility is to make an omelette. There are at least 2 or 3 ways, at least, of making an omelette.
That's
I
right.
cannot just impose one way, because maybe one way fits more with my creativity than yours, or one way fits more with my simple attitude towards things than your vast approach to life.
But the end result is
The
one.
end result is one. You want an omelette
Okay.
at the end of it. Okay, so choice of work is an important, and I think it's related to, as I said, to al-wusa and justice, but also it's also related to the integrity of mankind, because it's related to the concept of free will, a concept of intellect, that people can make a choice by themselves.
So we don't take advantage of people in need.
Yes, indeed, yes. And that actually is, in a way, is linked to the third or fourth category, because we have 5 categories. One of the categories of rights, workers' rights in Islam, is treatment.
Okay.
Okay, and which is related to choice in a way. And treatment, where actually in Islam we have this beautiful term called ihsan. And ihsan, for me, it's more of the normative dynamism. So you do things right, in the right way. You do the right things in the right way, not because there's somebody watching over your shoulder, but because it's the thing to be done.
Because you feel like doing it.
Yes, it's something which comes by definition. If you are a human being, pursuing perfection, pursuing the pleasure and the mercy of God, you would do things as they are supposed to be done, because you on your own become a model, a role model of what Muslims should be doing. So with ihsan, with treatment, we deal with people again justly, courteously. We do not use work as an avenue for subjugating people or abusing their need for work, or even abusing them, and this abuse can be physical, it can be emotional, mental, verbal. This abuse, all these forms of abuse are not in line with Islam, because we are supposed to be treating people justly and treat them as we like them to treat us. So treatment is an essential component of workers' rights in Islam.
Okay. So let's go through to the third element, which is wages, or the third right, which is wages.
Yes. Wages in Islam,
Or people would prefer calling it remuneration.
well, it depends, sometimes I do agree with Shakespeare, sometimes I don't. I mean, Shakespeare said, "What in a name? A rose will still smell sweet with a different name." But sometimes I think people use words just to do things differently, or play with meanings or semantics. But wages in Islam have 2 important dimensions. First dimension is the relative value. So you pay somebody wages that are equal or relatively equal to the value of work and effort they have put forward, or they have exerted. So you acknowledge and you appreciate the work they have done, and which means you cannot underpay somebody. You cannot pay people, nuts or peanuts, and then expect them to actually work very, very hard. So that important dimension has always been paid attention to in Islam. And the other dimension of wages is to pay people timely. We have the famous tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that workers have to be paid their wages even before the metaphor used, even before their sweat is dry. So
as soon as possible.
As soon as they finish and they discharge their duties,
you should pay them.
Yeah. Because there is an element of motivation, there's an element of realization and actualization.
There's an element of need as well, because people work because they need the means.
Definitely. Which is again linked to the issue of treatment. So it's all linked up. It's so you pay people on time because then they feel that they are not being abused. They are not being enslaved in one way or the other. And again, because there is an economic need, but there's also the economic situation of society. If in order for a business to prosper, they need to make sure that money goes out through their employees. These employees would go out and buy things or buy services, and these services will actually contribute to the other.
So it's a cycle.
It's a cycle indeed. It's a cycle indeed.
Okay. Now let's go to the fourth element, which is work conditions. I think this is very important, and it might be one of the important elements in this list.
Certainly. It's important also to mention here because people sometimes confuse work conditions with treatment, which in my opinion, there are two different categories. Treatment is more to do with the individual, how you deal with the individual,
the human side of
the
it,
human aspect, the human relation, how you view the other person, how you view them equally. It's very important. While work conditions is the environment that you create for work, and how to have that environment very conducive for people to produce. If you just imagine, somebody is supposed to be working hard to actually check files or go through some embroidery or whatever, and you actually have them in a very, very hot room with no air conditioning or with no water to drink or no sanitary facilities. How would you expect these people to actually operate? In Islam, for instance, people who give fatwa, jurisprudence and rulings in Islam, they have to have the right conditions. For instance, they cannot have tight shoes. They should not have tight belts on them. They should not actually be desperate to go to the restroom. They should not be hungry, because all of these things impair their ability to think. And if you cannot think, you cannot use your intellectual abilities, which in a way make you a human being, renders you different from everything else. In a way, it really undermines your productivity. So in a way, the conditions of work enhances your productivity. It can also then act as a way of enhancing your value as a worker, and it will not be used against you when people cannot actually produce because the work conditions are not suitable. People cannot be blamed for not producing sufficiently. So you have to provide them with the appropriate conditions of work.
So basically, there is the element of the basic human needs that should be fulfilled. And beyond.
Human needs, that's one thing, but also one has to be attentive to the work needs. If you need to, let's say, deal with a lot of paper, and the room is sweaty, you can't expect the papers to be tidy. You need to have some airflow in the room, for instance, to ensure that the end product is quite good. So it's to do with the human needs.
So it will affect the productivity
of course,
as well.
The productivity. It's very much directly related to productivity. And the underlining element of it is also integrity. If you just imagine, I've been to some working environments outside Oman where people, it's so, inhuman, really, the way they've been working, the conditions, it's so dirty, you can hardly breathe, and it's very dangerous. So people,
And they don't get paid on
course,
time as well.
of course. Well, and then the thing is, the moment these people become ill, or somebody cuts him or herself, they are taken away from work, and then of course, they can't sustain themselves or their families. So in a way, the conditions, the working conditions, provide you with sustainability, with continuity, and so it's very important rights. Or set of rights for people, and Islam has respected that. There are various traditions and examples in Islam where the Prophet Muhammad has asked people to provide, or the employers to provide the appropriate working conditions, for their employees, because then you can expect a lot from people.
Okay. Let's go to the last right on the list, which is specialization or career development.
Yeah, it is. People might argue actually that it is a modern concept. It is indeed a modern concept, but in Islam, if one wants to argue for it, it's really related again to the concept or the value of wusa, or ability. And in Islam, as we've been discussing recently, the Prophet Muhammad, and even actually the caliphs after him, all of them have identified leaders in their own right in Islam, and have asked them to work and specialize and to spend a lot of time and effort in that field, and not to digress, because they believed that if they really focus on that, they will give the best results. So in Islam, it is more to do with career development through specialization. You identify your abilities, and through this ability, you would exert your best effort, and then that's where you find the best job for you, the best area of work for you, and you really continue working on them.
Can you state an example?
I would give an example more in during the Abbasid Caliphate, because in the Abbasid Caliphate, this concept took a much better or clearer role, where schools, of learning, we had also zoning in terms of industrial areas were zoned. Various, so for instance, the leathersmiths, coppersmiths, or blacksmiths, and so forth, chemists, doctors, each one of them had their own area, and a teacher's role at the time, particularly the Abbasid dynasty, his or her role would be to identify the ability or the skill of the individual, the student who is being brought forward. And if they find out that this ability is more to do with learning in terms of academic learning, that person is sent to the schools. But if it is found that this person's ability is more to do with practical learning, they are sent through apprenticeship to these zoned areas, and guilds were developed, unions were developed to regulate the teaching and apprenticeship practices, for these people, in order to allow people to capitalize on their abilities and get the best out of themselves. And indeed, Ibn Khaldun, he's a scientist, a social historian, who actually documented and analyzed all of this in the 14th and 15th century, and after it happened, had actually deduced very important lessons on how people use guilds and use apprenticeship to actually allow specialization and allow people to grow, and allow these industries, to grow, and allow wealth to be grown, and how people then will be very much able to match their abilities and efforts with the wealth that they can actually accrue, because otherwise, if you don't have it regulated, If you don't have these rights respected, people would be working very, very hard, but not able to translate that hard work into wealth. And after a while, it becomes an avenue for subjugation, an avenue for abuse, and an avenue for how do you say, some kind of creating a caste system where the poorer, where the poor people become or continue to be poor or become poorer, and the rich become richer. So it's all related also to this economic concept of balance and integrity.
So basically, specialization and career development is not a new concept. It's been there all along.
Yes, it
all
has
along.
its roots. In modern day, we have different terminology, different ways of approaching it. In terms of training, staff development, and so forth. But the values and the early practices were already there in Islam before.
Okay. Now let us touch on animals as workers. What are the main rights related to this category of the workforce?
Surprisingly, they are not very different in terms of essence from those assigned to humans. But in terms of their practices, they of course will be different. For instance, the dimension of wusa. You cannot, in Islam, you cannot bring a weak animal and load that animal or work that animal to death in a field. And actually, in fact, we have several examples in the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where camels, cows came and complained to the Prophet Muhammad about and horses, how they actually been overworked, by their owners. And the Prophet,
of course, this is one of the miracles of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Yeah, so then the Prophet Muhammad did actually advise and spoke very critically of those people, and he said that yes, these are animals. Do not abuse them because they can't speak, they can't express themselves, but you have to realize their wusa, their abilities. And which goes along with that, the concept of conditions of work. This animal has to have a comfortable condition of work. We cannot just assume because this is an animal, we can put them in any working environment. No, we have to cater for the cleanliness of the environment, of whether it's cool or hot for them. Because at the end of the day, that animal is a soul. It's something which we are very much going to be asked about, how we deal with that animal.
And they're here for our service.
For a purpose.
We need to take care of them.
Yes, they are here for a purpose, and we have to be aware of that. And we need to, again, this concept of treatment, of ihsan, does also apply to animals. Because if we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah the Exalted, to be merciful with us, to have kindness on us and mercy on us, then we have to have mercy on these animals. It's all reciprocity. Whether it's an animal, whether it's plant, even a plant, you can't extract from a plant more than actually it could. Otherwise, you would burn it out very soon.
Okay, Ahmed, we'll go for a break and we'll continue with this discussion after the break. Welcome back, Ahmed.
Thank you.
I have an interesting question for you, Ahmed. Why Muslims now have different views from what Islam has prescribed as rights for humans and animals?
It's a very interesting question, as you said. I don't want to sound we are flagellating ourselves, but I think what happened with Muslims, Muslims lost their initiative or leadership, their intellectual leadership. And perhaps I think also what has been the most important and significant reason is people lost time with themselves. They don't have time to think with themselves. They don't have time to be with themselves. They don't have time to reflect. If you look at the Quran, it's so interesting the number of times the Quran has asked us to think and to reflect and to contemplate. Okay? You know, in things that we see every day, even though still the Quran asked us to think, reflect, and contemplate. And as I mentioned in our discussion about ethics, ethics is really a manifestation of a very important duty, the duty of thinking. We have to think about what we say, how we say it, what we do, and how we do it. Because if you say something to a fellow human, the damage can be irrevocable. If you say nasty things. Some people can react differently, you know, they can maybe accept an apology. Others might not accept apologies. So Muslims, you know, at large now, and if you talk about two things, animal rights and human rights, let's talk about human rights. With the human rights, there is a lot of, I would say, pressure. We have, you know, Islam is very much compliant with human rights. Actually, it goes beyond human rights because it respects a lot of things in humans. But we as Muslims stopped thinking about us as humans in relationship with God, and we started thinking about humans as tools more than anything else, as subjects to governance more than anything else. When it comes to animal rights, again, it's a question of greed. We look at animals not realizing that there is a spirit that flows in that animal. That spirit, you know, without that spirit, they are not subdued to us. You know, if just imagine these animals can be created with different evil spirit, let's say. I mean, you will have no way of controlling these animals. But if we remember that these animals are filled with good spirit, and that's why they are subdued for our service, you know, on this earth. And when I was young, I was always struck by the story of the man who gave a dog some water. And the Prophet Muhammad said a very, very important thing. He said, "في كل كبد رطبة أجر." In every, you know, living soul, whether it's animal or human, there is ajr, there is reward.
There's reward.
Okay, so the concept of the spirit, the soul, the life, we have lost perspective of that.
Even if we look at it in another point of view, is if we don't have these animals or creatures on Earth, maybe our survival would be at risk, and we would not be able to sustain our development.
I mean, how do you go out of it? I like to claim I'm a positive person. Okay, yes, we identify the problem. We know that there is a problem and how we view things, how we view animal rights, how we view human rights. How do we go about it? How do we become more conscious of it? How do we become more proactive about it? In my opinion, there are two ways.
Okay.
First is to be conscious. We have to think. Think before you say anything. Think before you do anything. Think about everything you see in front of you. Really just think why it's there, why the circumstances that we are trying to address has risen, how we can address it and serve it in the best manner. Okay? What will be of service to God? What will be of service to God's, you know, mission for this thing on earth? And the second thing, which is very important, and it is easier said than done, is to love. Love people, love God, love people because of God, but love God, love people, love yourself. You can't imagine how many people who can just hate themselves. They don't know it, but they hate themselves, and that's why they don't do good to themselves. They don't look after themselves because they don't love themselves. You know, loving yourself does not mean that you just feed yourself to death, or, you know, you dress up. No, this is not the love. Loving yourself is how to deal with things in a peaceful manner, how to love things around you, how to
take care of your body. Let's say, for example, that Almighty God has has trusted on you.
It's for me, it's much even deeper than that, in the sense, take care of your emotions. For instance, how to stop being angry, how to stop feeling envious, how really this kind of overreaction we have to things, overreaction in consuming, overreaction in abstaining, overreaction, everything. How to be more balanced and more just person, and that is, will actually allow you to love yourself. Allow yourself to love others by, for instance, not assuming that your workers do not like you. Don't assume that. Don't assume workers would try to find any opportunity not to do work. Don't assume that. Assume the contrary. Assume that your workers
They care about the
they
work
care
and they're
about
going to
exactly.
do it. Yeah.
But they require the right motivation. They require the right environment. They require the right treatment. They require the right wages. They require the right work. Okay? And if you provide them with that, you would get love out of them. And you would love them. And you would love things around you. Then you create an environment of love that is very productive. See?
Ahmed, what about following the teachings or the guidance of the Holy Quran? Would that bring you back to the right track?
Of course. Definitely. Again...
what I mean to say is people have gone astray now, and they have forgotten all these values. So do they have to come back to the basic principles of Islam and the teachings of the Holy Quran so that they can go back and practice this in their daily life?
What do you think is stopping them from doing so?
I would say people pretend to be busy, or people have other perceptions of life. Other things have become more important.
They just, for me, I don't think they love themselves. They are focused now on entertaining their needs. Let's say needs of importance, needs of food, needs of importance and food, needs of social actualization. But they don't really love, how do you say, being peaceful, or love tranquility, or love is a relationship that actually exists within yourself and with others, which allow you to see things positively, which allows you to see things in a more respective and prospective manner, allows you to hope for the best. Most of these people who leave the Quran behind them, or leave things behind them, or actually go against the law, whether it's human law or divine law, there are people who are trying to prove a point that they can do it on themselves, on their own, by themselves, but then would soon realize they cannot do it on their own. They need others, and they need God to do it. And that's where love comes.
Okay. Now, Ahmed, let's shift to the other side of the story. Tell us a bit about the duties of workers in Islam.
Well, duties are related to rights, as we all understand. And, there are a variety of duties in Islam, but perhaps I would like to focus on 4. And the most important of them, which is also the most general, is the duty of nasiha, duty of advice. Nasiha is a very important concept in Islam, where people are obliged to advise their fellow Muslims, their rulers, their employers about what needs to be done. If you work and you notice something is not going well or needs to be rectified, you just do not wait for the employer to find out. You have to be proactive.
You take the initiative.
Exactly. And you advise of how one machine can actually, or process can be more productive or
improved.
Exactly, enhanced in its quality. And with that also, you actually have advice to your fellow workers on how to become better workers. And you use that, as we use trade unions, to have workers sit down together and discuss how to make their work a better place. The second duty, which is important duty, is the duty of honesty, amana. Okay, and whether it's financial, monetary amana, or whether it's amana in terms of time, you use your time appropriately. And when I advise people on this, I usually use the concept of halal and haram. If you are employed to work 7 or 8 hours per day, okay, and you are paid, let's say, 8 riyals per day, so 1 riyal per hour, okay, you need to work these 7 or 8 hours in full. Otherwise, 1 riyal or 2 riyal that you have taken are not yours because you haven't earned them. So you really have to justify that. And with al-amana, it comes the third one, which is itqan, which comes from faith. Itqan means quality. You have to do things proper. And the quality is to do the right thing right first time and every time. Okay? And you do it because there's nobody behind you, but because you have trained yourself, your conscious and your iman, your faith from within, to really do things well. And finally, I think it's to do the fourth duty is to exert the best effort, which is in Arabic we say ifrag al-wusa or badl al-juhd, and that is to do your best effort to the best of your abilities. Just do not do 1% of your ability, do 100% of your ability, because that's what you owe your employer and you owe your fellow humans.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ahmed, for being here with us into the program. Dear listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Hatem Al-Salam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.